This training module will explain how to understand and avoid piecemealing, provide guidance on determination of project schedule and project scope, and explain what the responsibilities of a proponent are under the MCEA. The outline of this training module is comprised of the following sections: piecemealing, choosing a project schedule, defining project scope, proponent responsibilities, and frequently asked questions. In the Merriam-Webster dictionary, piecemeal means in pieces or fragments. In the Class EA context, piecemealing refers to breaking up or piecemealing a larger project into smaller component parts, with each part addressed separately. Piecemealing is not in compliance with the Municipal Class EA. Proponents are not permitted to reduce their responsibility by piecemealing a project into component parts. Projects cannot be broken down into phases, with each part or phase being addressed through separate studies and separate schedules. Environmental impacts of MCEA projects must be assessed together. This ensures that the impacts of the entire project are considered on a comprehensive basis and made transparent to the public and government agencies. Projects are classified in the MCEA in terms of schedules. Schedules are generally determined based on the level of potential environmental impact. The following are the general descriptions of the project schedules. Schedule A projects generally include normal or emergency operational and maintenance activities. The environmental effects are usually minimal, and these projects are pre-approved. Schedule A+ projects are similar to Schedule A and are pre-approved. However, the public is to be advised prior to project implementation. Schedule B projects generally include improvements and minor expansions to existing facilities. There is a potential for some adverse environmental impacts. These types of projects are required to proceed through a screening process, including consultation and documentation as outlined in Phase 1 and 2 of the MCEA. Schedule C projects generally include the construction of new facilities and major expansions to existing facilities. These types of projects are required to proceed through the environmental assessment planning process, Phases 1 to 4, outlined in the Class EA, including consultation and documentation. Proponents are reminded that the activity with the highest schedule determines the EA requirements. If one component is listed under Schedule A, another under Schedule B, and another under Schedule C, the entire project is subject to Schedule C. It is the proponent's responsibility to determine the project schedule. It is important to read and be familiar with the whole MCEA and not just the appendices or schedules. The information included in the document will assist proponents in the determination of the appropriate schedule. As an example, if the preferred alternative to service a new development includes a new water reservoir where land is required, or force mains along existing and future roads, the component parts are dependent on each other to solve the need. Important project descriptions from Appendix 1 of the Municipal Class Environmental Assessment are: Schedule A+, establish, extend, or enlarge a water distribution system and all works necessary to connect the system to an existing system or water source, provided all such facilities are in either an existing road allowance or an existing utility corridor, including the use of trenchless technology for water crossings. Schedule B, establish new or expand/replace existing water storage facilities. Establish, extend, or enlarge a water distribution system and all works necessary to connect the system to an existing system or water source where such facilities are not in either an existing road allowance or an existing utility corridor. The water mains along existing roads could be defined as Schedule A+, as they are in an existing road allowance. The water mains along future roads could be defined as Schedule B, as they are not in an existing road allowance. The new water reservoir could be defined as Schedule B as land acquisition is involved. The entire project would be Schedule B as the component parts are dependent on each other to solve the need. It is not appropriate to treat the water mains along existing roads as Schedule A+ and the remainder as Schedule B. This would be piecemealing. Project scope refers to the magnitude and extent of a problem. Different projects should be scoped differently to reflect the varying degrees in complexity of the project, the environment potentially affected, and the level of stakeholder interest. Projects should not be broken down or piecemealed into component parts or phases. If the component parts are dependent on each other, then all of the components must be combined and dealt with as a single project. The complexity of a project is based on many components, including the technical considerations of the project, potential environmental effects, and input from stakeholders including government agencies, interested persons, non-governmental organizations, and Aboriginal communities. The determination of complexity and its ongoing assessment requires sound professional judgment and is an inherent function of the management of a project. The level of complexity will therefore affect the manner in which a project proceeds through the process. The level of complexity may affect the selection of the project schedule. The divisions amongst Schedules A, B, and C projects are therefore often not distinct. The Class EA document defines the minimum requirements for environmental assessment planning. The proponent is responsible for customizing it to reflect the specific complexities and needs of a project. Complexity should be considered at the outset of project planning and throughout the process. Review and confirmation of the project schedule should be undertaken at the very least at the end of each planning phase. Different projects should be scoped differently to reflect the varying degrees in complexity of the project, the environment potentially affected, and the level of stakeholder interest. Proponents may elect to follow a higher schedule in the MCEA where the complexity of the project or sensitivity of the environment potentially affected warrants. The proponent is responsible for determining the appropriate scope of its Class EA, including the determination of the problem or opportunity to be addressed by the MCEA. The scope of the EA will be determined by the magnitude and extent of a problem. Earlier studies or review may be available to assist in defining the problem. For projects which are expected to generate considerable public interest or controversy, the proponent may find it advantageous to introduce a discretionary point of consultation and commence the public consultation process during Phase 1. Prior to commencing the study, or during the course of defining the problem or opportunity, it may become apparent that a master plan approach is appropriate or coordination with the Planning Act is beneficial. The proponent is responsible for identifying alternative solutions to the problem. There is usually more than one way to solve a problem. This should include examining alternatives to, which are functionally different ways of approaching and dealing with the defined problem or opportunity. Depending on the problem or opportunity identified, there may be a limited number of appropriate alternatives to consider. The do-nothing alternative should also be considered to identify the implications of doing nothing to address the problem or opportunity. Proponents are responsible for documenting the physical description of the area where the project is to occur, and a general inventory of the natural, social, and economic environments which are to be considered when reviewing the effects of a project in that area. Existing conditions, features, and boundaries will need to be developed on a project and discipline-specific basis reflecting the scope of the study area. The level of detail required will vary depending on the significance of the potential environmental effect and the stage in the class environmental assessment process. Proponents are responsible for the identification of alternative designs for the preferred solution. There are usually a number of ways in which a project can be developed and designed to implement the preferred solution. Alternative design concepts, or alternative methods, are a means of carrying out the proposed project which are different ways of doing the same activity. Alternative designs could include the consideration of one or more of the following: alternative technologies, alternative methods of applying specific technologies, and alternative sites for a proposed undertaking. The existing conditions information may need to be updated in order to determine the impacts of the alternative designs. Consideration should be given to the boundaries, features, and required level of detail. An evaluation method is defined as a formal procedure for establishing an order of preference among alternatives. There are a multitude of different evaluation methodologies to choose from. Considerations in selecting a method include project complexity, the number of alternatives, data requirements, characteristics of the impacts, and acceptability and traceability. Effective consultation is key to successful environmental assessment planning. The MCEA defines the minimum consultation requirements. It is up to the proponent to scope the consultation program with consideration of who is to be consulted, what they will be consulted about, where they will be contacted in the process, how they will be consulted, for example, what methods will be used, how input from the public will be integrated in the study and the decision-making, the manner in which comments and concerns will be responded to, and how the plan will be monitored to determine the effectiveness. There are numerous methods for contacting and consulting with the public. Selection of an appropriate method should include consideration of the scope of the problem or opportunity being addressed, the level of complexity and sensitivity, potential environmental issues and impacts, specific community characteristics and needs, available resources, approaches used on other similar studies in the community, potential audience size, level of involvement, for example, potential for information exchange and input, degree of information exchange that can be expected, potential to identify issues, potential to resolve contentious or outstanding issues, and special needs of the participants. For complex projects which are expected to generate considerable public interest or controversy, the proponent may find it advantageous to introduce discretionary and/or additional consultation. Additional consultation can allow for identification and resolution of issues before decisions may have been made. One of the principal aims of consultation is to achieve resolution of different points of view, thus reducing or avoiding controversy, and ultimately avoiding the use of the provision to require a project to comply with Part 2 of the EA Act. Each class environmental assessment project is unique. As a result, the level of detail of required information will vary by project or stage in the planning process. The appropriate level of detail depends on a number of factors, such as the nature and complexity of the proposed project, the potential for environmental effects, the level of public interest, and the number of approvals required. The Class EA is a self-assessment process, and the proponent is responsible for determining project scope. This is a key step in the MCEA process that may influence the project schedule, the identification of alternatives, the development and implementation of a consultation program, how the required EA process is carried out, and how commitments made during the EA process or agreed to within the EA process are implemented and maintained. If additional consultation is included, does it affect the selection of a project schedule? Not necessarily. Additional consultation may be included for a number of reasons. However, if a project is especially complex, the proponent may elect to elevate the schedule. Can the project schedule be changed during the process? Yes, the project schedule should be reviewed by the proponent during the EA process. If the schedule is changed, the public and/or stakeholders should be notified of any changes. Can a member of the public change the project schedule? The MCEA is a self-assessment process, and it is the responsibility of the proponent to determine the appropriate schedule to follow. Although members of the public are not able to change the project schedule, the public can request the project be subject to a Part 2 order, an individual EA Part 2 order request. The minister may grant the request for a Part 2 order request, or alternatively, decide to impose conditions for additional work. Who can assist proponents in determining the appropriate scope of an MCEA? MOE Regional EA Coordinators, government agencies with an interest in the project, members of the public, and Aboriginal communities.